Many of us living in Bengaluru have witnessed scenes of our lakes foaming. This is happening due to a lack of sewage and effluent treatment capacity in the city. The government has been trying to solve this problem through a decentralized approach, and this has led to almost 2,500 small scale sewage treatment plants being installed across the city, with the majority of them located in apartment complexes. These systems collectively treat almost 20% of the sewage generated in the city. Let's deep dive into what happens at the apartment level. Right now, apartments get their fresh water either through piped water connections or bore wells. Once the water is used within the apartments, the untreated wastewater goes to a decentralized STP where it is recycled. Some of this water is consumed directly within the apartment complex for things like toilet flushing or landscaping. But most apartments find that they have to discard almost half of this recycled water into stormwater channels. This water then flows into lakes, which causes an excess buildup of nutrients and negatively impacts the lake's health. What we are proposing instead is to reuse this water across three campaigns: Grey to Green, which uses the water for greening public and private spaces; Grey to Blue, which uses the water for recharging clean lakes and aquifers; and Grey to Yellow, which uses the treated water for construction and industry.
Today I'd like to start with a question. Why are cities crucial to solving the climate crisis? 70%. The UN estimates that 70% of people will live in cities globally by 2050. 70% of emissions already come from cities, so they're drivers of climate change. So the question is, are they also susceptible to climate change? And a recent McKinsey report shows that around 800 million people that live in cities globally are going to suffer from floods. 1.6 billion people will suffer from extreme heat, and another 675 million people will suffer from floods, from water scarcity and droughts. So, how many of you think Bangalore is ready to handle the looming climate crisis? Show of hands? That's what I thought. Our time to act is now. We're currently drafting out climate action plans for the city. It's our job as researchers, as policymakers, as concerned parents, concerned children, businesses, to come together and solve the most crucial crisis of our time. So what do we do? Today I'd like to talk to you about the importance of the interlinkages between blue, grey, and green infrastructure, and why it's crucial for sustainable and climate resilient cities. And I'll loop back to the video that that was just shown on how this ties back to building climate resilient cities. So first, what is blue, green, and grey infrastructure? Blue infrastructure essentially refers to all the water bodies in the city, whether they're surface or underground. So be it lakes, rivers, or aquifers. Green infrastructure refers to trees, green roofs, green facades, or anything that you can visually see that's green in the city. And grey infrastructure essentially refers to everything that's man-made. So whether that's sewage treatment plants, pipeline networks, road networks, or stormwater channels. Currently, the material flows between the blue, green, and grey layers are being ignored, which makes us more susceptible to climate threats. First, let's look at the material flows from the grey layer to the blue layer. Essentially, because we're dumping sewage as well as wastewater and effluent water channels, our water bodies are left perennially filled with untreated sewage and wastewater. This also leaves them polluted and unable to perform as freshwater sources. We also have garbage being dumped into them, and because of these three things together, they're unable to buffer the city from floods. Now looking at the opposite end of the spectrum, how does the blue layer affect the grey layer? Because we've been able to tap into rivers which are far away, coupled with a lot of groundwater withdrawal, we're able to get more and more water. And our buildings aren't being forced to become as water efficient as they should be, which in the case of a water scarce city, they would automatically need to adjust and do. Our freshwater consumption is very high. And Jevon's paradox says, the more of a resource you have, the more you'll use, and that's been true in our case. And now let's look at the intersection of all three layers. I think the urban form was covered really well by my previous speaker, but the layout of buildings and the buildings themselves actually encompass the three layers together really well. One of the main factors leading to poor groundwater recharge is the fact that large tracts of the city are impervious, and all of this combined leads to droughts. Another thing is that stormwater channels are not properly managed because of the way buildings come up at random, sometimes in the middle of what should have been a Rajkalway, a stormwater channel, or worse, a dried lake. And all of this together again leads to more floods. Finally, the buildings that we have in our city mimic countries where the climate is far more temperate. A lack of shading, huge glass facades cause overheating in buildings, yet we continue to build more and more and more of them. And this leads to an overdependence on air conditioning, which in turn leads to more air pollution, which in turn leads to higher temperatures. We're stuck in a series of vicious cycles. And this again, combined with decreasing green cover and a lack of shaded walkways, makes our cities very car dependent. And all of these things combined together lead to extreme heat. So I hope this mapping illustrates the current paradigm in which we find ourselves. We have a disjointed series of layers. We look at blue infrastructure separate from green infrastructure and gray infrastructure. They're managed by separate bodies, and often they're divided by imaginary political boundaries, leaving the interconnections fractured. Our cities are less livable and more susceptible to climate threats, and they're only going to get more and more susceptible with what's to come. But I'm going to use the word solutions here instead of scenarios. There are solutions. One of the key things that we would need to do with the blue infrastructure layer is to look at how we can restore water bodies and our waterway network. We need to also look at how we can boost groundwater recharge and store rainwater through green infrastructure. We really need to put green cover wherever we possibly can, but do this in an ecologically conscious and socially just way, and also make sure that we maintain it sustainably. Because we have such a highly dense built-up environment, we need to explore innovative ways of how we can incorporate this green cover into the city. Singapore has many beautiful examples of how you can take modern building typologies and combine it with green cover so that the city becomes more livable. We should adapt this more widely. We also need to look at ways our sidewalks can become thriving green spaces, which will increase walkability so that we can walk to work listening to birdsong. And finally, gray infrastructure. As you can see, the maximum number of things that we need to do is here because it's all man-made. So that would including boosting wastewater reuse, improving our solid waste management systems, increasing the amount of permeable pavements. One of the building bylaws in Bangalore, it's a pet peeve of mine, states that you have to have 30% of every large apartment complex left unbuilt. Full stop. There's nothing about how permeable it should be. There's nothing about how it should act as a sink for rain. Small changes like this can go a long way in making sure that we absorb as much rain as we can into the city. We also need to finally realize we're in India and design buildings for the Indian climate and context. The new buildings of our future should embrace shading, should embrace the fact that the city has temperate climate for most of the year instead of being air conditioned. So what would happen if all these layers worked in harmony? Well, we would live in cities that would look more like living creatures. We would know where we wouldn't know where earth blocks end, and instead of concrete, I think the cities of the future will have earth blocks, and where the green cover started. We would have more and more non-human visitors. We could have clean, pristine water bodies, and we would be able to walk around the city thinking about what we have to do for the day rather than running into cars and bikes on our footpaths. But to achieve this idyllic living environment, we need cooperation. We need cooperation between regulators, active citizenry, and also we need to respond to the fact that we're an aspirational country and markets and economics guides most of our motivation. So how do we apply the idea of planning for these material flows to catering to markets, regulators, and community? Now I'm going to loop back to the video you just saw. I will illustrate this through the example of our work related to wastewater. So this is a Sankey diagram of Bangalore, which captures the current flow of wastewater through the city. We treat approximately 1460 mld of wastewater a day. 20% of it is treated in decentralized STPs. Another 65% is treated in centralized STPs, and 35% of it goes untreated, which in comparison to a lot of other cities in India is fairly high. Just 35% going untreated, not so bad. But where's the missed opportunity? Out of the water that is treated, 65% goes unused. So what was the point of the treatment then in the first place? I think almost everyone in Bangalore, or even people outside of Bangalore, might have seen scenes like this of lakes foaming. And most of us might have thought that our lakes are foaming only because of industrial effluents. But research at ATREE has shown that this is mostly because of domestic sewage. So we started to look at how an environmental bad could be turned into an environmental good. Because wastewater is not just a problem, it's a huge missed opportunity. So we first started to look at why wastewater is going unused in apartments. We decided to look at decentralized STPs because that's an easier starting point. And why do apartments view wastewater as an treatment as an unfair burden rather than something that could be an opportunity? And there were 6 key reasons. There is a negative perception with regards to wastewater. Instead of ignoring this and expecting that people will change with awareness alone, it might be more practical to opt for socially acceptable solutions. In India, we've used gobar for years to fertilize lands. So why not think about using wastewater for greening? The second major issue was monitoring protocol. Currently, it's mandated that apartments do monthly tests, but more recently, there's a push in the Pollution Control Board for real-time monitoring systems. Is this practical? I think not. Real-time monitoring systems cost anywhere between 12 and 18 lakhs. Most residents don't see the economic case for treating wastewater right now. Why would they invest in such expensive systems? But there are workarounds for this as well. We could look at cheaper cheaper testing kits, which use calorimetry, which a lot of startups in Bangalore have actually begun doing. And we could also look at how we can bring down the cost of sensors. The third thing is that there's a structural disconnect between the motivations of builders and new home buyers and residents. Most builders that install STPs care about only 2 things: space and the amount of money that they have to invest. And because of this, they actually install systems which are expensive and result in higher operating costs for residents, making it harder for residents to actually want to maintain their systems. The fourth issue is that we have a lack of physical distribution in the city. Tankers don't really want to transport wastewater because they think that it's going to deter from their primary source of business, which is fresh water. And the 5th and 6th reasons are very closely linked. The mandate, which currently states that you have to use all of the wastewater within the apartment, doesn't offer reuse options outside the apartment fence, which is very important if economic gains are going to be made by residents. So to address this, we've launched 3 campaigns. The Grey to Green campaign, which uses wastewater from apartments and greening from apartments for greening public parks, medians, and private green spaces. We're happy to say that we've already done a trial run with the BBMP, and they're considering to launch this across the city. Grey to Blue, which will eventually need the wastewater that comes out of our apartments to go through additional treatment so it can be used to recharge the aquifer. And this will result in more water security for the city. But for this, we need to first establish groundwater and water quality parameters and find suitable technology to achieve those parameters. And last but definitely not least, grey to yellow, which uses wastewater for construction, infrastructure, and industry. We think that these three things combined, construction, infrastructure, and industry, could use almost a fourth of the water that comes into the city on a daily basis currently. So finding an alternative is crucial. So how are we doing this? Of course, we can't do this alone. We've started to build a partner network, and we're looking at how we can continue to build this partner network. And what will the impact of these three campaigns result in? We think all of the wastewater in the city could be reused, which would mean there's more freshwater availability. And because there would be an economic case for wastewater, more and more of it would be treated. So I hope this example illustrates the importance of the interlinkages between green spaces, water, and everything man-made. We need the government, private sector, and community to work together now to change the current paradigm that we're in and prepare us for climate change. Thank you.